Welcome to my presentation. So my topic for my PhD is about understanding informality. And I'm really looking at understanding the social, cultural, political, and environmental influences on women entrepreneurs in the informal economy in Papua New Guinea. So this research is part of a bigger global study looking at the informal economy or informality across 15 countries in what we call the Global South or developing countries, countries in the third world. So my specific study is on Papua New Guinea, and which is also where I am from. So that's just a brief intro. I'm in my second year, and my professor is Jose Luis Molina. That's my supervisor. Okay, so briefly, there is a lot of words, but I will explain it and it won't be so boring, so don't worry. As I said, this is a global research. We are funded by the European Union to look at informality in different contexts. So for my case, I'm looking at how women do business in the informal economy, and specifically on Papua New Guinea. I have other colleagues who are in other universities across Europe as well. They are looking at other aspects of informality, like illegal trade or different topics. So basically, at the end of our research, we will combine all our findings to produce a global study. But for my case, I will be presenting specifically on Papua New Guinea. So I'm looking at two groups of women. Women who are known as informal market vendors. So they sell along street side, they sell in marketplaces, and they're mainly trading agriculture produce. So as I go through, I'll explain the context of Papua New Guinea so you'll know why I'm looking at those two women. Women who are market vendors, and the second one are women who are in some kind of formal businesses, but there is some aspects of informality in a sense where they have unpaid workers who are not registered, or they don't pay their taxes. So they may have a formal business, but they don't do annual taxes. So there is some kind of informality in their business. So those are the two groups. And I'm using an ethnographic approach. So of course I'm in anthropology, but my background is in public policy. So it is also like a shift for me as well. So I'm saying this so you understand where I'm coming from, because I know all of you are anthropologists here. And throughout I may be saying some things that, are not really, doesn't make sense for you. And I'd really appreciate if you can give me feedback as well. Okay, so next one. So I'll start off by saying what the informal economy is, and then I'll go into my research. So I'm using the definition by WIEGO, which is this organization, and it looks at informality or the informal economy as all workers, economic activities, enterprises, and jobs that are not recognized by the government or the state, and therefore do not have any kind of protection or any legal protection by the government. And so there's so many definitions about the informal economy. So depending on what angle your research is looking at, for me, it's really looking about the role of the state as well as how women are participating. So I decided to use this definition of the informal economy. And just as also an overview, the informal economy is quite large. According to the International Labour Organization, over 2 billion people work or do business within that sector. So it's quite a large part of our economy across the globe, not just in developing countries or so-called Global South, But in also, the global north or developed countries, there is some kind of informality in how people work and do business. Okay. Carla, you tell me the time as well. Okay, so I'm going to present my research in the following structure. First of all, I'd like to give you the context because, first of all, I guess many people may have heard about Papua New Guinea, but maybe have not heard the full history about it. And it's quite relevant for my research because to understand the informal economy, you have to understand it within the context of colonization. Otherwise, there is no way of understanding how the economy functions. So that's why I'm giving you a bit of a background, the history, and then I'll talk about my philosophy, how it's guiding my work, and the methods that I've chosen, and then some very early findings. These are not like concrete, it will change because, as I said, I'm in year 2. So I don't know, maybe year 4, I will still be changing it. But this is where I'm at right now. So I'll give you some very quick findings next. Okay, lots of words, but I promise you it won't be boring. So I will start from pre-colonial history because it's quite important to talk about the fact that trade and exchange activities were already happening across New Guinea. So New Guinea includes West Papua, which is in Indonesia. So that's a gray part. It's not showing here in all the maps of Papua New Guinea. It doesn't show, but this is a bigger island. The gray part belongs to Indonesia, but they are ethnically like me, so they are Melanesians. So the history of Papua New Guinea's trade activities goes back a long time. Early agricultural remains were discovered dating back 10,000 years. So it's quite an old agricultural society. And most of the area is patrilineal. And that's important to say because land is passed to men and women depend on men for access to land. So it's important to put that as a baseline because it has influenced how women currently, operate within the country and do business and all that. So land is owned by men, it's passed through men. There are matrilineal societies along the coastal part of the country, but even any decisions to do with land involves men doing all the negotiations. So this is the baseline in which we were as a country. And this map shows you some of the trade activities that were already happening back before the 1800s. So along the coastal area, there was already, if you see here, this tabu is actually shell money. So it actually had a currency and was used to trade for, and I think Isabel might know a bit about this because her research was in this region. They traded using tabu, which was regarded as money. Some exchange activities like the Highlands, the Western Highlands Mocha, you might have heard about the big men and how they traded for prestige and status in the community. The Trevor Kula, which I think is famous through Malinowski's work. And then also along the coast where now you have the modern day Port Moresby is what we had the Hiri trade. So there was also trade happening along this coastline. And then next to the Mocha, there's also the Engas tea. So there was a range of trade activities that were already happening, exchanges were already happening, and accumulation of wealth was already happening through the acquisition of these things that were traded. And in all of this, research has shown that women's labor were used to support men's accumulation of wealth. So because they didn't have access to the land rights, their labor was required for the raising of pigs, for production of agricultural produce. So with that also came the control of women's labor. So there was already some existing, I guess, inequalities before colonial influence. Next. Okay, also a lot of words, but don't worry. I'm halfway through. So this is a map of how the whole island of New Guinea was divided up. And you have Netherlands, New Guinea, German, New Guinea, British, New Guinea. And now Netherlands, New Guinea is part of Indonesia, so it's not Papua New Guinea. German and British became one, and in 1975, or before that, 1906, became the British Papua New Guinea. So I guess colonially, there was a lot of activities happening on the German side. We had the plantations that were already set up, and you had indigenous farmers and smallholders were involved in the trade of oil to Europe and North America. That was in the 19th century. In the British side, where the colonial administration was, men were already engaged in wage labor, but women were not allowed to enter the sort of administration areas because the housing were not provided for families, and only people where the men who had jobs could reside in the city. So you already had women back in their villages looking after the land while the men were working for waged employment, where they were in wage labor. Then in the 1920s, so it was quite recent, there was first encounter with people in the interior area. So that's the highlands region of Papua New Guinea. And since then, there were, patrols and people going up there to do agriculture, basically. So agriculture boomed really in the interior part. And this is where you also have the first sort of, they call them indigenous rural capitalists, where the first indigenous people were engaged in actually commercial production of coffee and exporting it to the global market. So that already started happening around 1950s and 60s. And then, so in all of this, men were actually the main ones cultivating the cash crops. Women were not included in all of this. They had no access to the land and they were not trading at all. So some of the researchers, Papua New Guinean researchers have said that women escaped the whole process of colonization because they were never even involved in anything that the men were doing with the administrators. It was only until the 1970s that they started engaging in trade. But of course, that's debatable. So let's move on. I think this is where I want to talk about the markets. Foundations of the informal economy. By 1975 is when our country was scheduled for independence from the Australian administration. And it was around this time that a team of experts were engaged by the World Bank to develop a strategy for the soon-to-be independent country. The team was made up of Michael Faber and the anthropologist Keith Hart. So they produced actually a plan with 8 points for the new country on how to do development. And one of it was actually about promoting the informal economy because there was no way the local people could actually engage in any kind of economic activity if it was all supposed to be like formalized. So the informal economy actually became public policy and it was recognized and influenced the drafting of our constitution. So it's a core part of, it's a recognized part of the, unlike in other countries where it's seen as illegal or, something to destroy, I guess. And the idea was that by integrating people into the economy, even if it's the informal economy, they would eventually they would eventually transition into the formal economy. Unfortunately, to this day, that has not really happened. So 90% of the population still do business in the informal economy, and it's currently worth about $4 billion USD. So it circulates that much money. So it's quite big and generates much more than the formal economy. and women make up 60% of all informal economy workers. So giving that long background, is my justification for why I want to look into the case for women. Why are women predominant? And some of the reasons I've already explained in the past. Their access to land was limited and all that. But to this day, they still do not engage in the formal economy as much as men. And even if they do, they tend to fail and they tend to revert back to informal activities. So my interest is to know why this is the case. And this informs my research question. Next one. So my research design, I'm guided by postmodernism and feminist anthropology. In line with postmodernism, to argue that there are no grand ideas, and of course, it's all relative, and that the voices of those that I'm researching must also be represented in my research. It needs to come out strongly in my research. So it's not just my interpretation of what's happening. And I also acknowledge that in my research, because I'm an insider as well, I am from Papua New Guinea, my voice will also be represented. So I'm not an objective outside observer. I am also going to integrate my own lived experience into my research. And then in terms of feminist anthropology, recognizing that all relationships are gendered. And because I'm looking at women specifically, I would like to really unpack, the gender discrimination that they face. Okay, next one. Okay, so very quickly on research methodology, I'm in my second year, so I haven't really gone to process all of my findings. So that's why I'm spending a lot more time giving you the context and talking about the research design. I'm doing anthropology. I've done 4 months of fieldwork already, so I'm currently processing my data. I've done fieldwork in these 2 locations on the map, Goroka and Port Moresby, and the idea is to compare an urban metropolitan, which is the capital city of Port Moresby, with Goroka, which is more like a rural township with some level of with ongoing subsistence farming. So Port Moresby, the women I'm working with are migrant women, so they're actually dependent on trade 100%. They don't have farms. They have left their hometowns in other places and have migrated into the city. And the women in Goroka still have access to their land. They're farmers, they're producers. So my plan is to identify the difference between those 2 groups and what factors are impacting each of them. So I've done ethnography already, done my fieldwork. I've also done personal network mapping with 19 women, and I've processed my information using EgoNet, qualitative data analysis through Atlas TI. Next. And then this is just some examples to show you how I'm using EthNote for fieldwork. If you've used EthNote, this is like an online diary or online field journal, which you can use every day and to update your information, and then your professor or supervisor can look at it. So it's a live journal, basically. So here I've done all my entries in a day. I use my phone, and Jose Luis can comment, and he has done that. So that's how we communicate while I'm in the field. Next. And then I did some personal network mapping, but because these women don't have very big networks, they have 1 or 2 people involved in their business. It's all family-based. It's quite rural for some of them. So the networks are quite small, but there's some interesting cases where if you see where the circles are really thick is families, all family involved in the business. And then you may have 1 or 2 external people that they engage to do their work. So a lot of the women that I've talked to, including women and formal entrepreneurs, are social entrepreneurs. They're doing business, but it's not 100% business, and they're not reinvesting all of their money in growing the business. So there is that social element to, they're all social entrepreneurs, even the formal ones. Next. Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, this is just showing you Atlas TI and how it's helping me analyze my data. So I've used Atlas TI to do coding, and oh, sorry, that's my own alarm. Yes, 2 more minutes. To do my own coding, and it's quite useful because it can easily show you like what are some of the most common themes that are coming up from the interview. So I'm using this for the interviews. So my interviews are all quite open-ended questions. There's no set pre-questions, and really I have 5 major questions, but I just guide the conversation. So I really found this useful because there are things that are reoccurring, and Atlas TI can help you actually pull that out. And it also has an AI function that can help you analyze the information. And yeah, that's it. I think that was the last slide on my findings. At the moment, I've kind of categorized them into these 3 major areas because I'm trying to understand the social, cultural, political factors impacting women. They're grouped around individual barriers or factors, formal institutions and their role, and the social condition or the environment. So I won't go into detail on the findings because at this stage it's quite early for my research, but I mean, some of the main things is that on an individual level, a lot of these women don't have access to a lot of income. Or they're not generating huge amounts of revenue. And when they are generating it, it's reinvested in other things like the household expenditure or social obligations. So it seems like women entrepreneurs are under a lot more pressure to contribute financially to social obligations. And they're also subjected to, controlled by the menfolk in the community and their household. So control over income is not, they don't have 100% control over the money they're generating. So you can see that because their businesses don't grow, they don't reinvest it. And most of their revenue goes to children's needs or household needs. And then there's a high level of business motivation. Like people do want to be trading, they want to generate money, they want to do business, but there's a lot of barriers with social expectations and family obligations. And even like an example is one woman who actually went out of her way to do a PMV bus service, like a public transportation. She would get requests every week for a death in the family, contribution to this child's school fee. And the assumption was that from the villagers was that it was her husband's money that was used to pay for the bus. So she was required to contribute to all of these social obligations from her husband's clan. So eventually she had to tell them that this is actually my own money and my husband has not invested anything in it. So those are the sort of added complexity for women entrepreneurs. And for those who have been successful, they've had to completely cut off family ties and to be able to do business independently. So there's a few examples where women have done that and they have lost their familial connection, but they have created new ones through the church network or through the professional network. So there is an end in some social networks and a regrouping in others. And I don't know if I have time, but I probably don't have time. This presentation will be shared, I think. So if you want to look more in detail about my research and my findings, you can do that.